A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
I lied about being colorblind to everybody I know, and now I'm terrified that the truth is about to come back and destroy me. It all started 2 years ago when I found myself at an art museum on a first date, staring at an abstract piece that swirled in a riot of colors I couldn't describe. My date was raving about the artist's use of cerulean blue, crimson red, and sunlit yellow, but I was stuck trying to match my own reality to what everyone else saw, so I blurted out that I was colorblind, hoping it would explain my uninspired silence. The lie spiraled into my life like a spilled drop of paint across a pristine canvas. I found solace in the assumption that I was perceived as an innocent oddity, a quiet soul ensnared in shades of gray, when in reality I was flourishing in the richness of color. I threw myself into the deception, regaling my friends with stories of how I navigated life through hues that didn't exist for me, while secretly wielding my phone's color-picking apps to inform my wardrobe choices and social media posts. I reveled in their sympathy. My friends began to treat me like a creative genius hindered by a chemical deficiency, while I became the imposter in the gallery of my own personality. Yet, fear bubbled just beneath the surface, especially after one fateful encounter with a painter at a local art fair. They handed me a palette straight from their collection and asked how I felt about the interplay of colors. I stood there, drenched in sweat, blood pumping frantically, panic gnawing at my insides as I lied again, basing my description on perceived trends rather than reality. Somehow, they didn't see through my facade, but my heart remained lodged in my throat, with every lie propelling me further from the person I was meant to be. Months turned into a year, and my life unfurled under the weight of deception. It made me sick, but I couldn't stop lying. It fed on my insecurities, trapping me in a distorted reality where truth felt like a bomb waiting to go off. And then, one day, everything came crashing down. An old acquaintance from high school reached out to me, a muralist who recognized me from my pretense of art appreciation. Eager to reconnect and showcase their latest work, they invited me to an exhibition opening. I should have declined, but curiosity gnawed at my insides. I stepped into the vibrant room, the air thick with laughter and anticipation, when I caught a glimpse of the mural. The stellar overwhelming colors that should have made me feel alive left an icy chill racing down my spine. The artist had painted a massive piece depicting a scene from our childhood, a memory I'd long buried. Every vivid shade triggered emotions long forgotten, and unrestrained waves of shame surged through my veins. My friends cheered, and I stood frozen, suddenly aware of how absurd it was that the true me was liquefied behind artifice. In the murmur of voices, I heard someone mention how extraordinary it was for a colorblind person to appreciate art. That statement was like a slap across my face. I felt sweat bead on my forehead, and bile crawled up my throat as I realized the web of lies I spun had ensnared not just me, but everyone who cared. My vision began to dim, and an instinctive impulse jolted me to escape. I rushed outside, feeling shadows closing in as I stumbled down the sidewalk, desperate to shut out the noise, when I heard my muralist acquaintance yelling after me, trying to piece together my strange behavior. Instead of stopping, I ducked around a corner, and my heart pounded like a war drum while I crouched behind a dumpster, taking deep breaths, the world around me blurring into muted waters. I prayed that my ruse would hold. But dread clung to me as I caught sight of a flicker from my periphery. A woman in the crowd had noticed my sudden retreat. She approached the mural, confusion etched across her face, and then she stepped back in horror. "That's not real," she gasped. "I don't believe this." The words buried into the ground beneath me like daggers, and I caught her desperate glance scouring for someone, anyone who would believe her. I couldn't bear it. I had to run, but a sense of slipping sanity gripped me in a vice. The lie I told to protect myself was splintering all around, with the chatter of muted disbelief echoing harshly within my skull. I kept my head down, moving swiftly through the streets until, at last, I plummeted into my apartment like a specter escaping a haunting. I isolated myself for days, drowning in shame, haunted by the fear that someone would expose me, the colorblind fake loved and revered by my friends, the surface version of myself endlessly praised but never the real me. My anxiety screamed for release until finally I returned to the mural, rationalizing that perhaps honesty could save me. I stepped inside, trembling, searching for the muralist, but the room was swallowed in silence as a crowd stood in awe of the piece that reeked of my lies, every stroke of paint echoing my deceit. I cleared my throat, preparing to confess, but that was when I noticed it. A shadow eased across the mural, stretching eerily in the multi-hued light. Everyone gasped, but my mind suddenly spun. That's when I realized the colors were shifting. The whole mural was oscillating through a spectrum unfamiliar to my eyes but painted by a hand I once knew. What the hell? I murmured, caught in a trance as the hues morphed and wove together like living strands of darkness whispering my name. I stumbled forward, the eyes of the crowd pinning me as I reached out to touch the changing surface, and at that moment a freezing sensation engulfed my skin. The colors danced and wove, intertwining with my very memories. The colors faded, one by one, until everything was enshrouded in black. "You lied," echoed a voice from beyond the surface, familiar yet menacing. My stomach twisted as flames of realizations ignited all around me. I could feel everything I feared swirling like a tempest as the truth behind my colors, my very existence, began to unravel. I was a nursing aide at a small-town hospital, where I quickly learned that the stress and fatigue of the job could turn even the sweetest nurse into a sourpuss. They would snap at patients, huff at each other, and treat us aides like we were invisible. It was around my second month when I devised a plan to even the score. I would make their drinks decaf when they were rude, my tiny act of rebellion tucked into the calm hum of the break room. At first, it felt harmless, even justified, like a petty thrill bubbling just below the surface as I watched their faces sour after a grueling shift. But then I started noticing strange things, shadows creeping in the corners of the break room, a heaviness in the air that seemed to settle with every snicker or snide comment I overheard from the nurses, not to mention the patients who never seemed quite right, always stealing glances at the empty chairs, mumbling under their breaths. It gnawed at me. And yet, I kept going, slyly swapping regular coffee with decaf whenever I caught a nurse berating one of my fellow aides or being particularly harsh to a vulnerable patient, not realizing that my little game started to draw attention. One night, as winter's chill seeped through the walls, my friend Lisa, who'd laughed it off when I told her about my scheme, said she felt foggy, like time was slipping through her fingers every time she went on a break. One more nurse added to the list of those who just seemed off. When Dr. Richards asked about her condition, all she could muster were mumbled apologies, her face pale like something from a ghost story. The nurses began circling the break room with suspicious eyes, one of them muttering about a string of odd occurrences in the hospital, missing equipment, patients who were unnaturally listless, and I could tell they were onto me. I felt like an unmarked pawn on a playboard covered in shadows. Then came that frigid Tuesday night when Angela, the head nurse, a woman known for her strict demeanor but also for the glimmer of kindness that surfaced on desperate nights, came to me snapping, demanding why I hadn't stocked the break room. Her voice had the bite of ice. I thought of revenge, how easy it would be to serve her the decaf serum of retribution, but instead, something felt wrong. Maybe it was the way her eyes darted to the right, almost as if she were searching for something I couldn't see, the flicker of candlelight casting jagged shadows against the wall. Something dark and twisted was emerging in the air, and I stood frozen as Lisa fainted, collapsing against the coffee station, her breath barely a whisper, mumbled words that sent a shiver racing down my spine, something about being too quiet. That night morphed into a haunting blur, whispers floated around the hospital, quiet but insistent, a spread of chaos shattering the carefully maintained calm as Angela turned to me, her clarity slipping, teeth bared in disbelief that hinted at innocence gone wrong. I served coffee to a nurse who told me that kindness was dying in the hospital, and I couldn't help but nod, the truth stinging like bitter coffee on a careless tongue. By the end of the week, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The nurses were losing grasp of reality, staring blankly into the void at night, eyes those of hollowed ghouls. It was no longer so innocent when Lisa warned me about the nurses who had been found alone, muttering to themselves, their faces pale against the stark quiet of their scrubs. They started showing up at odd hours, always whispering incoherent phrases, searching for something they could no longer understand in the sterile hallways. And the coffee? The bitterness seeped into the very fabric of our sanity. It felt suffocating, toxic, as if the caffeine I so maliciously deprived them of had unleashed a torrent of darkness. I was alone now, isolated in a hospital where every comforting sound had twisted into a haunting echo. My colleagues became specters, muttering their grievances like a spell gone wrong, and I was certain something sinister lingered in the corners, laughing at my naivety. The final straw came as I entered the break room, shaking like a leaf, expecting to see the usual dull faces of disgruntled nurses, but instead found Angela staring into the void, her mouth moving but no sound escaping, her eyes wide, reflecting back the madness she felt swelling inside. I took a step back, my chest tightening as her lips parted into what can only be described as a grin, and I realized in horror that she wasn't even aware of me standing right there. The memory of her voice, strong and commanding just days before, splintered in my mind, melded with words I couldn't comprehend. Was it a warning or a plea? I fled, my breath hitting in my throat, but the break room doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the grip of whatever force had consumed them. I ran down the hallway, the aroma of coffee clinging to my skin like a death sentence, feeling the pinprick of eyes following me through the haze. A wave of furious whispers crashed against the walls, each jagged syllable lacerating my thoughts, as I raced for the exit, desperate to escape the nightmare I'd created with nothing more than a cup of decaf. It wasn't supposed to be this way, I just wanted to teach them a lesson. But now that chaos feasted on kindness, and as those ivory walls closed in around me, I knew deep down I had underestimated the darkness, and it would never let me leave this hospital alive. When I was in second grade, I had no idea just how much trouble my curiosity could cause, but the moment I walked into that dimly lit classroom, something ominous took root in my young mind, a seed planted by the whispers of my classmates. They spoke of Ms. Riley, the grumpy old teacher with too many rules and a penchant for punishing anyone who dared to misbehave. But my favorite part about her was that she always had a jar of cookies on her desk, tempting us like forbidden fruit. One day, during recess, I overheard two kids talking about a secret passageway they supposedly found behind the school's decrepit library. My imagination ignited, I could practically hear the whispers of adventure calling me, but when I asked around, no one could confirm if it was real. Fueled by curiosity, I decided that I had to find it myself. So, after school ended, I snuck into the library, heart pounding with both fear and excitement, and there it was, a slightly ajar door behind a bookshelf covered in dust, everyday object turned into a portal to the unknown. I pushed it open, nearly knocking over a stack of ancient encyclopedias, and wandered into a narrow, shadowy corridor lined with flickering bulbs that seemed to hum with their own life. I couldn't resist the thrill washing over me as I tiptoed further in, past walls scrawled with strange symbols and remnants of what looked like long-abandoned classes. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, something I couldn't quite place, but as I ventured deeper, a creeping sense of dread began to settle in my stomach, and I turned back just as the air turned icy and wild laughter echoed behind me from the darkness. In my haste to escape, I bumped into an old pipe that groaned like it was alive, and then it came crashing down, sulphurous fumes filling the air as I stumbled back, panicking. I fled the library, my heart racing, convinced that my adventure had been a grave mistake. The very next day, I returned to school, only to find the playground surrounded by caution tape, the laughter of my friends replaced with nervous whispers. Ms. Riley, who was usually a stickler for rules, had turned ghostly pale, and the principal looked like he was about to lose his marbles. It turned out that my little expedition had triggered a chain reaction of events that left the entire school in a state of chaos. There were reports of gas leaks, and the fire department was called, dragging their equipment through the doors like a scene out of a horror movie. And there I was, at the epicenter of it all, feeling like an innocent child caught in a storm I had unintentionally conjured. My friends stared at me with a mix of admiration and horror. I became the architect of their fear as they spun tales about the mysterious corridor that had unleashed chaos upon our esteemed educational establishment. But things took a darker turn when I learned the school was fined $600 for operational violation due to my reckless wandering, and worst of all, I heard whispers that Ms. Riley was going to make an example out of me, her favorite scapegoat to unleash her fury upon. The fear clung to my bones like a shadow, making me anxious whenever I stepped into the school. My days are spent bracing for the repercussions of my actions. I avoided the library, feeling the watchful eyes of the old books on my back, and I shunned recess, fearing the laughter was tinged with the knowledge of my culpability. But I couldn't escape Ms. Riley's gaze, so all I could do was wait for my reckoning. And then, one fateful Thursday afternoon, it happened. Ms. Riley stood before the entire class, eyes scanning the room like a predator, and before I could even take a breath, she called me out. "You think you can just cause chaos and walk away, don't you, Jacob?" she said, voice clawing at my insides like rusted nails. The laughter erupted around me, each giggle a dagger. It stung worse than I could have imagined, as I felt the weight of the fine hanging over my shoulders like a millstone. Ms. Riley pulled a paper from her desk with a flourish, waving it like a trophy of shame, my name scribbled across the top, the fine looming behind it like a storm cloud. "You, Jacob, will write an apology letter to the school, to me, and to the fire department explaining why you cannot play Third Floor Explorer anymore." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I suffered in silence as the classroom erupted in murmurs. That night, I lay wide awake, staring into the darkened corners of my room, grappling with the reality of my actions. I envisioned that creeping corridor, now pulsating in my mind with an otherworldly presence, as if it was mocking me for my cowardice. I became haunted by the shadows that flickered just beyond my line of sight, Echoes of laughter laughing at my missteps, and the stench of that ancient library filled my dreams with reminders of death. Weeks passed, and I continued to live in fear of Miss Riley's wrath, but then something strange began to happen. The more I dwelled on those terrifying moments in the library, the more I felt as if I developed an odd, twisted connection to the corridor, a tether binding me to something unseen. As if it was sending me a message, a gut feeling that encouraged exploration despite the consequences. One day, I gathered enough courage to confront my fears. I crept back to the library, fueled by a strange pull, and this time, I slipped through the doorway once more. Despite the pit of dread swelling within me, the air felt different, charged with electricity as if the corridor was alive. I stumbled deeper, drawn in by an unseen force, discovering decrepit classrooms filled with dust-covered desks and chalkboards. But there was something more, an aura of otherworldly mystery. Suddenly, in the shadows, I saw it, a twisted version of myself staring back from a cracked mirror, eyes wide open as if they held centuries of secrets. It whispered my name, beckoning me forward. Retreat was impossible now. Just as I reached out to touch the glass, a loud bang shattered the silence, and I whipped around to find walls shifting, the faint outlines of warning signs flickering into existence, urging me to escape. I stumbled backward, realizing that whatever hidden knowledge I sought came at a price, and I rushed back towards the exit, breathless and panicked, the laughter of ghosts echoing behind me. When I burst out into the light of the library, the distance between the shadows and me felt intangible. I ran home, heart racing, where I collapsed onto my bed, my body trembling with the weight of what I'd experienced. I told myself to forget what I saw, the corridor was just a trick of my imagination, a figment of a child's fears. But even now, as I type this, that voice, that mirror, lingers in the corner of my mind, and the thought of those secrets both horrifies and fascinates me. I eventually learned to live with the memory of that day, but sometimes, in the stillness of night, I hear the laughter ring in my ears, echoing off the walls of my mind, and I can't shake the feeling that I might still be connected to that corridor, that something trapped within it still watches and waits, waiting for the next curious child to open a door to chaos, waiting for a repeat of history, and the price of ignorance to be paid once more. I am under the influence of cannabis probably 15 out of 24 hours a day. Every day. Initially, it was just a way to cope with the noise, the chaos of an urban life that seemed to drown out any semblance of peace. I started with small puffs shared among friends, laughter spilling into the sultry summer evenings like the smoke that curled above us, but I soon slipped down a rabbit hole of dependence, craving the blissful haze that separated me from the world and my relentless thoughts. Somehow, each day began to blend into the next, an endless loop of green euphoria that dulled any emotional edge, and soon enough, it morphed from joy to a daily ritual. I lost count of how many times I lit up before breakfast, the smell of burnt herb mingling with eggs and coffee, and that warm, fuzzy embrace wrapped around me like a blanket, lulling me into a sweet stupor that I convinced myself was normal. My reflection began to change, the vibrant hues of life fading to a dull pastel that echoed the smoke spiraling above my head. Friends fell away, too, one by one, their laughter replaced by concerned glances as I sank deeper into this comforting cocoon, dismissing their worries with a casual wave, clutching my pipe like a talisman. I began to drift into thoughts that felt disjointed and strange, arguments with the voices in my head that grew louder in the stillness, their insistence piercing through the thick cloud that enveloped me. They whispered darkly, filled with scorn, reminding me of every missed opportunity and every shred of ambition I had allowed to wilt in favor of this sluggish existence, and in that distorted haze, I felt myself fraying. At night, when the world outside grew still beneath the blanket of midnight, the whispers morphed into something else entirely. They transformed into figures, cloaked in shadows that loomed just at the edge of my peripheral vision, feeling more tangible with each drag I took. My apartment became a labyrinth of unfamiliar faces and fleeting fears mingled with sweet cannabis dreams, and I could no longer discern if they were real or merely figments of my mind, a manifestation of my guilt and isolation. Simple tasks like showering and eating became monumental challenges, overtaken by the thrum of dread that pulsed beneath the surface, awakening once I extinguished my joint. I began to avoid mirrors, fearful of acknowledging the hollow-eyed stranger who inhabited my body. Friends stopped visiting, replaced by a parade of drifters I'd invite over in search of human connection, but soon realized they shared the same haze, their laughter echoing hollowly in the darkness of my mind. One rainy Thursday, the sky wept in tune with my thoughts, a perfect reflection of my internal turmoil, and I sank deeper into my sofa, convinced I had become invisible beneath the swirling clouds of my own making. It wasn't until the tapping began, A light knock one night that startled me from the warm embrace of my weed fog, echoing through the silence of my apartment. At first, I dismissed it, chalking it up to my wild imagination, swirling shadows in the corners, but the knocking persisted, steady and unrelenting, as if someone stood outside my door quietly pleading for entry. Heart racing, I cowered into my sofa, focused on the relentless sound, sweat pooling at my brow while my mind prepared to fall deeper into the rabbit hole. Each knock grew louder, urging me to confront whatever was out there, but dread knew me well by this point, wrapping around my throat, choking the courage from my chest. Anxiety bloomed within me. It could be the police, or worse, a former friend come to confront me about my spiraling addiction, but when I finally mustered the strength to peek through the peephole, I recoiled. The figure outside was gaunt and twisted, with an impossibly elongated face that bore a crooked grin, yet it looked unsettlingly familiar. It was an uncanny echo of myself, but hollowed, eyes sunken deep into its skull, staring at me with an unsettling hunger. I stumbled back, grabbing my stash in a panic at the sight of that ethereal monstrosity and the horrific realization that perhaps I had become a charred reflection of my true self, everything that I had loved stripped away. I sprinted to the window, desperate to escape reality as I methodically rolled the spliff to soothe the panic rising in my chest, but as I inhaled deeply and the smoke rose, so did a flood of faces, those long-gone friends circling my consciousness with pity and disgust, their laughter echoing hauntingly as they faded into my mind's eye. Just as I thought I might choke on the smoke, I caught a glimpse of a flicker outside the window, and there it was again, that familiar face looming outside, pulling on my heartstrings, gasping for life as the shadows thrummed and twisted. In a daze of panic, I grasped my phone, fumbling to call for help, desperate to shatter this web of psyche and reclaim what was left of me, but the screen wouldn't illuminate. The faces outside were swarming now, reaching out with elongated fingers, and all at once, the porch light flickered and went out. I could hear whispers resounding all around me, beckoning, pleading with a voice that sounded so much like my own, begging me to join them in their suffocating embrace. I crushed my spliff against the edge of the table, smoke curling around me, and as I contemplated whether I'd lost my mind entirely or if there was still a flicker of the person I used to be trapped inside the haze, the knuckles rapped once more against my door with a finality I could no longer take. The door trembled under the weight of my fears, pressing against the fragile wall between me and that grotesque reflection of myself, and as I felt the darkness closing in, a sickening certainty washed over me. I was neither alive nor dead, I was forever suspended in between, hidden under the influence of my own devices. I tipped the massage therapist $10 because I am cheap, but as I lay there in the dimly lit room, something sinister began to unravel around me, an experience I never anticipated when I walked into that unassuming spa. It began like any other day, tired from too many hours hunched over a computer. I sought solace in the promise of a deep tissue massage. The air inside was thick with the fragrance of eucalyptus, and soft music played lullabies of relaxation, luring me into a false sense of security as I was greeted by a woman named Elena, whose hands were said to work magic yet appeared to carry the weight of something more malevolent. As she began kneading my knots, I leisurely drifted into a blissful state, every ounce of tension uncoiling under her deft touch. But that bliss was short-lived, a strange heaviness replaced it, a sensation of being watched that prickled on the back of my neck, and when I glanced up, I saw a shadow shifting just outside the frosted glass door, but Elena didn't seem to notice, her eyes fixated with unnerving intensity on the structure of my back. I forced myself to look away, but a suppressed feeling churned in my stomach. Something was off, something beyond the mystique of relaxation that this spa promised. Then came the whispers, soft and indistinct, echoing against the calm. "You shouldn't have tipped her," they seemed to say, emanating from nowhere and everywhere all at once, worming their way into my consciousness. I gasped silently, my heart signing a frantic rhythm against my ribcage as the pressure increased with every stroke of her hands. "What a pity, you didn't learn," the voice continued, each word like ice water splashed against my skin. I could feel Ella pressing down harder, the massage turning into something more like a treatment of punishment, an overwhelming force that threatened to crush the very bones in my body. Suddenly, the lights flickered ominously, and in that moment of disorientation, I could have sworn I saw a figure flitting past the opaque glass, a gaunt face with hollow eyes staring in through the door. Panic surged through me. I needed to leave, to bolt from that table and never look back, but the weight of her hands felt like iron shackles holding me down. "Relax," Elena commanded gently, and despite myself, I felt a compulsion to obey. With every passing minute, the intensity of the whispers elevated, the voices pleading with me to heed the warning they presented, but who was I to question the depths of something I could not fully grasp? I tried to speak, to tell her to stop, to call for help, but my voice escaped into the ether, reduced to mere silence amid the cacophony of those ominous murmurs around me. Then, out of nowhere, a sliver of sunlight breached the cracks of the room, illuminating something dreadful. A collection of framed photos hung on the wall, each depicting a former client, the faces twisted in agonized rapture, frozen in those moments as if trapped in time. My blood ran cold as I recognized them, friends who had told me how rejuvenating their experience had been, how they felt lighter, happier, transformed. Each joyful smile now showcased the horror of what they had become. One face stood out, that of my friend Claire, her expression caught in a mask of ecstasy that bled into despair. The spark in her eyes dimmed to an empty void. Desperation clawed at my insides as a cold realization sank in like poison. Those voices, those muffled warnings were cries of the damned, victims of the secrecy between the spa therapist and the darkness behind the wall. I wanted to escape, yet my limbs felt impossibly heavy, as if every stroke from her hand siphoned away my strength, teasing out the essence of who I was until I would be just like them, captured eternally in blissful misery. With one last surge of willpower, I mustered the remnants of my strength and propelled myself off the table, crashing to the floor, but as I scrambled for the door, a chortle escaped her lips, an unsettling melody of control, hearing my broken breath spill all around as the room darkened, the shadows stretching out like fingers eager to grasp me. "You're not going anywhere," Elena's voice echoing through the abyss that enveloped us and drowning out the whispers turned wails behind me. I kicked the door, desperate and frantic, but it wouldn't budge, and when I turned back, the room had transformed. The walls morphed with grotesque limbs stretching toward me, snapping the air between us, sinister smiles glimmering in the half-light as if they knew fate wrapped closer around my throat. I dashed toward the window, the only remaining hope, but the moment I reached it, the frost turned to glass, slick and impenetrable, reflecting the disarray in my mind and trapping me in my own confusion. That was when I heard the most bone-chilling moment of all. Behind me, Elena laughed softly, the sound reverberating with the sinister promise of those she had claimed. And through the tortured fabric of reality, I understood. I was marked now, a thread in her tapestry, destined to join their ranks in that photo, smiling through sheer pain. In one final desperate plea, I mustered all the strength I had left and slammed my fist against the glass, the sound reverberating through the mocking hall, a stony reminder that my cheapness had led me here. All I had wanted was a moment of relaxation, and now, I was poised to become another victim of Elena's twisted hauntings, with nothing but a cursed understanding that sometimes the price you pay for comfort is far more costly than you could ever anticipate.
I never thought that allowing my mother to host Thanksgiving dinner at my house would lead to such chaos, but here we are, 3 days away from the holiday, and all I can think about is how I may have opened the door to something unspeakable. My wife, Sarah, is heavily pregnant with our 4th child and has been feeling exhausted and anxious, so I thought it would be a kind gesture to let my mother take over the cooking this year. She's been insisting on bringing her classic turkey and stuffing for as long as I can remember, and although my mother is eccentric, let's just say her ideas about food are unique, she promised she wouldn't do anything too outlandish this time. Since our first Thanksgiving together as a married couple, I've always felt the pressure of blending our families in the presence of holiday cheer, and Sarah has been under so much stress already. But as the day approaches, I've started to notice things that make my skin crawl. It began when my mother presented a package of what she claimed were secret spices for the turkey, each ingredient labeled with cryptic names. She explained they were traditional family recipes passed down for generations, but there was something eerie about the way her eyes sparkled when she mentioned them, like a wolf revealing its meal after a successful hunt. Sarah, noticing my discomfort, told me to ease up and let my mom have her fun, but late at night, when it was just the 3 of us and the kids were asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I could hear my mother moving around the kitchen, testing her concoctions and humming strange lullabies that felt foreign, even menacing, in their melody. The scent of the spices wafting into the living room was strangely intoxicating, laced with an undertone that made me feel both dizzy and anxious, and every time I tried to confront her, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand, claiming it was all in good spirit and for the family. It was around this same time that I found our youngest, Emma, talking to what she described as an invisible friend who made her giggle loudly at odd moments. Kids her age often have imaginary friends, but when I pried deeper, Emma's stories took on a bizarre, unsettling tone. "He says Grandma's food is magic and that we're all invited to dinner," she'd say, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and trepidation, as if she were caught between a dream and a nightmare. As Thanksgiving Day neared, my anxiety spiraled, and it didn't help that Sarah was increasingly sleepy and withdrawn, unable to shake what she described as a lingering fog in her mind. It was then that I went to look for my mother, only to find her hunched over the kitchen table, her fingers dripping with purple-red juices that I didn't want to think too hard about. "I'm just preparing the turkey, sweetie, don't worry," she said with an unsettling grin that stretched across her face, revealing crooked teeth that seemed to glisten with something unholy. I saw a glimpse of the turkey. Its skin was unnaturally glossy, and there were an array of small, round wounds where the feathers had once lain, looking almost like a string of pearls encased in the fleshy, glistening skin. "Where did you get this?" I uttered, trying to keep my throat from constricting too tightly. My mother looked back at me, her expression shifting from affectionate to something feral, and though she didn't answer, the air in the room thickened with a kind of infectious dread. I stumbled backward, grappling with the chill creeping up my spine, convinced my mother was losing her mind. Before I could leave, she whispered, "They'll love it, they were waiting for you," and my heart raced painfully at the insinuation. It was without question a breaking point. I confronted Sarah, suggesting we uninvite my mother, but her response left me stunned. "Let her do this, please. I think I need it. I don't want to deal with anything else right now." I pestered her for weeks, but with that hint of desperation in her voice, I felt backed into a corner. Thanksgiving came, and the atmosphere was rife with tension. I attempted to remain composed as friends and family arrived, but a discomforting strain hung over us, a dark cloud shrouding the festivities. The food, glistening in all its macabre beauty, began to arrive, turkey adorned with crimson glimmers, sides overflowing with vibrant colors, the very air filled with an intoxicating sweetness that made my head spin. As we sat at the table, I eyed the kids, who eagerly hovered over the food, whispering secrets amongst one another, fueled by some silent pact I couldn't grasp. I watched in horror as they took their first bites, followed by delightful gasps and soft giggles, every forkful seeming to ignite their spirits to heights I'd never seen before, yet there was an edge of something primal in their delight. The adults, too, were transfixed, chatting joyfully as if no one else could sense the creeping chill between us, the hallucinations in the corners of visions that twisted laughter into darker sounds. My chest tightened as I felt my mother's gnarled fingers brush against my shoulder, and she leaned in to whisper, "They told me this day would come, that all would be well. Don't you see, this is how we keep the magic alive?" I felt ice coil around my heart, the ominous weight of her words settling deep within me. The moment Emma leaned across the table, her smile too wide, too predatory, to announce that Grandma's magic tastes so good. And my body began to betray me, the urge to scream battling against my instinct to protect. And then, just as quickly, I felt my resolve waver, almost collapsing under the deliciously dark enchantment that twisted through the air like invisible threads binding us all. That evening blurred between reality and terror, all of us trapped in a dreamscape where joy danced alongside malevolence. I realized with a jolt that the children were not simply enjoying a Thanksgiving feast, something dangerous was unfolding. Before I could act, the lights flickered, plunging us into shadows, and as confusion reigned, Sarah's voice echoed through the darkness, "We're all just pieces in her game," tinged with an eerie, knowing calmness, as if she were in on a secret knowing I could not comprehend. At that moment, I felt an exhilarating thrill of the macabre awakening deep inside, tearing at the ties of sanity as I become a spectator in this grotesque festival, watching my family become enraptured, my mother's soft laughter raking through the cracks of normality, as they surrendered to a feast that was anything but ordinary. I could hear a soft chant rise from the children, their words swirling like whispers carried on the wind, and that night, as darkness settled, I understood that I had failed my family. What I had thought to be a simple holiday dinner had turned into a horrifying rite, where every bite tightened the grip of something lurking, hungry, at the edges of my world, drawn in by a maternal force that would stop at nothing to ensure that this Thanksgiving would never end.
When I'm at work, sometimes I let people have things for free, and I never thought it would lead to something terrifying until the day Ellen walked in. She was just another customer in my small-town convenience store, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's names and the daily special is written in fading marker on a chalkboard. Ellen always looked a little out of place, her clothes were too nice for our rundown neighborhood, her hair was perfectly done, and her smile felt rehearsed. At first, I thought she was just trying to lighten her workload by picking up snacks for the craft night she hosted at her house. But on this particular Thursday, something about her seemed different, as though she was searching for something deeper than just a snack. I had just finished restocking when she came up to the register with a pack of gum, her eyes flickering to the scant selection of drinks behind me. There was something compelling about her, something that made me want to reach out and connect, to break the mundane cycle of transactions that droned on day after day. Without thinking, I told her, "You can have that for free." Her smile widened, revealing cheerful dimples that brought warmth to the usual chill of the store. But instead of gratitude, I felt a shiver slip down my spine when she leaned closer and whispered, "You should be careful what you give away." Those words lingered like a bad omen, clinging to my thoughts even as she walked out the door, a lightweight breeze shifting the air behind her. The following week, I found myself drawn to her again as she entered the store, this time with a careful look on her face. I knew she was examining me as much as I was her, and maybe I was the only one who noticed how she hovered at the edge of the fluorescent lights, as if standing too close to them. I offered her a candy bar, thinking it might put the doubt to rest, but instead, her expression turned cold. She took it, all while meticulously counting how many candies I'd given away in the last month. The darkness wrapped around the air in the store like a fog, thick and heavy, and I started to notice more signs of it: the late-night customers leaving awkward silences in their wake, customers who glanced over their shoulders as if expecting a shadow to follow them. My co-workers thought I was losing it, talking about paranoia and stress, but each time Ellen came in, those whispers echoed louder. One evening, I had to stack supplies along the back of the store when I stumbled across an old flyer pinned to the wall for a missing person, a girl who had vanished without a trace. I felt a weird flutter in my stomach, a connection that maybe I was overlooking. The flyer faded and blurred, but the mundane words turned sinister: "If you have any information, please come forward." I found out she had last been seen at a craft night, the same one Ellen hosted. I didn't get a chance to ask her about it. When she came in next, I noticed the unsettling shadow beneath her eyes. I tried to confront her with the flyer, but she laughed, her voice lacking sincerity, and then, unnervingly, I felt an overwhelming urge to offer her more free things, as if my instincts were being warped like the circumstances surrounding her presence. I should have listened to myself. I heard an urgency in her laughter that echoed around me like an alarm. Instead, I fell deeper into the rabbit hole, offering her the chocolates, the drinks, and even snacks, feeling compelled, even enchanted, to keep giving her whatever she wanted. And that's when everything spiraled. The last time she came in, she stood at the counter, her eyes fixated on me in a way that made my skin crawl. "You know, those who take things for free shouldn't be surprised when they lose more than they bargained for," she muttered, her voice taking on a melodic yet ominous tone that resonated within me. I could hardly breathe, yet I felt unable to move as she leaned in closer, the fluorescent lights flickering uncertainly above us. There was something watching from the shadows, something both inviting and menacing. In a fevered rush, I tried to shake off the discomfort. I offered her the last of my stash, the store's best energy drinks. "You don't have to do that," she said, her smile twisting into something sinister yet sweet. Her fingers trailed over the drinks like an artist evaluating their work. "But you'll come to find out that nothing in this world is free, not even the kindness of strangers." I think I was still in that trance when I waved her out the door, but the dim light of the store flickered violently at that moment, and I heard a faint whisper echo in the darkness, "Keep giving them away." I dropped the energy drinks, they shattered on the floor like glass hearts, and Ellen simply walked away, leaving me surrounded by the crumbled remnants of her malevolence. Days passed, each more distorted than the last, until I finally decided to close the store for good. There was a gnawing realization that every free thing I had given her had drained a piece of my soul, twisting me into something dark. Yet, every night I still found myself waking with a jolt, staring at my pale hands, thinking about the next customer who would walk through those doors, someone else I could offer something to, freedom or fate. As Ellen taught me, the lines blurred in a cruel game. I haven't seen her since the day I closed the store, but sometimes, when the night goes quiet, I hear whispers in the shadows, echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind, reminding me that when you give something up so easily, sometimes there's reflection in the darkness. And one day, perhaps I will pay that price. I was 14 when my dad remarried, and at first, I thought having a stepmom might be fun. She seemed nice enough, always bringing me little gifts and smiling her way into my life. But as soon as the honeymoon phase wore off, things took a dark turn. My stepmom, Lydia, was obsessed with appearances, and not in a healthy way. The first time she mentioned hair, I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, and she poked her head in, her smile plastered on a face that always felt like it was holding back something sinister. "You know, darling, if you just let a little more grow, you'd look so much more mature," she said, her eyes glinting like shards of glass. I laughed it off, thinking she was joking, but that was just the beginning. As weeks passed, she began to push me harder. She filled our bathroom with creams and potions that she insisted would enhance my natural beauty. I complied, thinking it was just a phase, but when she began to shave patches of my hair off and coax me into embracing the fuzz blossoming around my chin, I started to feel trapped. "You're so beautiful as you are," she would say, but it never seemed sincere. My friends began to notice the strange hair growth, whispering behind my back at school, and I felt shame like I had never known. One day, as I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to figure out how to tell my dad, Lydia entered, holding a thin razor and grinning madly. "It's time to take it to the next level, sweetheart," she coaxed, and I froze, every cell in my body screaming for me to run. It was then that I realized the hair wasn't just her obsession, it was something darker. With every stroke of the razor, my reflection morphed into some grotesque version of myself. I became the living embodiment of Lydia's twisted ideals, the hair thickening, curling, until what remained of my identity faded like summer light. My room grew quiet, the once comforting glow of posters and knickknacks distorted by Lydia's chaotic energy. My dad had no idea, the man he loved was too enchanted by her facade, oblivious to the darkness clouding his daughter's existence. I started to withdraw from everyone outside my home, the glares and jeers at school replaced by muffled conversations in dark corners. Then came the day she brought home a strange little old woman. Lydia introduced her as Clara, her facilitator, whatever that meant. Clara's eyes glittered like feral jewels as she surveyed me, and for the first time, I felt like a specimen under glass, my humanity dissected in their minds. "We're just helping you embrace your true self," she cackled, her voice reminiscent of dead leaves scraping the asphalt. The following weeks were a blur of humiliation, each morning marked by terrifying silences filled only by the buzzing of clippers and the scent of unnatural oils. I didn't just have a beard, I felt as if I were being groomed for something much more sinister. Knowledge that I couldn't fully grasp loomed menacingly in the corners of my mind. I finally confronted my dad one fateful evening, the words tumbling out in a chaotic mess as I begged him to listen. "Lydia's crazy, I'm not this person, I don't want to be this," but the words fell flat against the rigid lines of his shirt as he turned away, dismissive. "She loves you, you need to accept her guidance," he replied, and that was when I lost it, ranting, spewing out my anguish until there was nothing left but the hollow ache of a daughter desperate for her father's recognition. Slowly, the gravity of my life pressed down harder, and I found myself sneaking away to the library, hiding between the rows of dusty tomes, searching for something to latch onto, a sense of self that seemed unreachable in my own home. One rainy evening, as I thumbed through a book on folklore, I stumbled across tales of shape-shifting creatures that could take human form but hid secrets beneath the surface. The parallels unraveled in my mind, and I saw Lydia's true nature. She wasn't just a woman, she was something other than human, using my femininity as a vessel for whatever dark agenda she thrived on. That realization pinched my heart with fear but infused me with a strange courage. I wouldn't let her bend my will any longer. That night, as the storm howled outside, I lay in bed, plotting my escape. In the days that followed, I gathered my strength, watching her every move, learning all the things she missed about me. I would appear obedient, the dutiful daughter in her eyes, while secretly waiting for the moment she revealed the full extent of her ambition. The opportunity came when she announced a small ritual, "Just the three of us," she said, "to solidify our family bond." I barely slept that night, thinking of Claire's mocking laugh. As Lydia prepared her bizarre array of candles and odd herbs in the heart of the living room, a tremor of dread shook my resolve. When she began chanting in a low, guttural voice that resonated with something primal and dark, I knew this was it. My chance. I sprinted to the kitchen, clutching a knife tightly, the metallic taste of adrenaline spurring me on as I returned. But when I swung it at her, slicing through the space between us, she flinched but did not scream. Instead, her eyes ignited with an unspeakable rage, and the air grew thick with tension. "You think you can escape, child? This isn't just about appearances, it's about power," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom, and the room spiraled into chaos as Clara cackled like a maniac, raising her hands, twisting the shadows. In that moment, it dawned on me, she wasn't just my stepmom, she was stealing pieces of me, weaving them into some dark tapestry that would make her powerful, all while using my identity against me. I plunged the knife into the altar of herbs she had so meticulously laid out, a desperate effort, and as it shattered in a burst of light, the room erupted around us. Lydia's facade peeled away, revealing a shadow creature, and Clara, transformed into a wraith, screaming violently as the darkness enveloped them both. I stumbled back, horrified and yet liberated, as their forms disintegrated into wisps of shadows carried away by the wind. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house, the weight of my beard somehow gone, and with it, the invisible strings that once bound me to their grotesque quill. I wandered into the sun, feeling the softness of my face, my identity, encapsulated in the warmth of my skin. My dad never spoke of Lydia again. It was as if she had never existed, but I knew better. I had glimpsed the darkness lurking beneath the surface of our lives, and I would carry that knowledge with me. I found my voice again, and though the scars of my experience would stay, I had reclaimed not only my identity but my place in the world, and that was worth everything.
It was just supposed to be a casual night in with my friends, sitting on the couch while we binge-watched old horror movies and made jokes about the cheesy effects, but everything shifted when Lynn, my closest friend, leaned in with a mischievous grin and said, "You know, watching you two is like watching a really intricate roleplay," and for a split second, I started laughing, not because I thought it was true, who would seriously think that? But more because the idea struck me as absurd, like something ripped from the pages of a bad fanfiction. My boyfriend, Jake, chuckled too, more out of awkwardness than agreement, but when I looked at Lynn, her expression changed from playful to something darker, almost predator-like, and in that moment, I felt a chill skitter down my spine. I shrugged it off, dismissing it as one of her quirky comments at first, but the laughter died in the air, replaced by a heavy silence. I didn't realize it then, but my laugh had unearthed something buried deep within the group, like invoking a slumbering spirit at a seance. The night progressed, filled with laughter over bad jump scares and popcorn fights, but every so often, I'd catch Lynn staring at me through the flickering light of the TV, her gaze intense, almost conspiratorial. As the clock struck midnight, the final film ended, leaving echoes of creepy music lingering in the air, and we all decided to call it a night. I started cleaning up the mess, tossing empty snack bags into the trash while Jake and Lynn chatted in the corner, and I could tell something was off. Lynn's smile had morphed into a smirk, and I felt that familiar unease prick at my skin, a sense I couldn't quite shake. Later, as Jake and I were getting ready for bed, I joked about Lynn's comment, playfully nudging him, "Maybe we should, spice things up a bit?" But he didn't laugh. Instead, he frowned, his brow furrowing. "What did you mean by that?" he asked, and I felt a rush of confusion. Wasn't we on the same page? I told him I was kidding, but then he shifted closer, scanning my face. "You didn't take her seriously, did you?" The weight of his gaze pierced through me, and a strange dread curled in the pit of my stomach as I denied it, even as I recalled the glint in Lynn's eyes. The next day, Lynn's texts were as animated as always, but beneath the surface, I could sense something off, like frayed wires on a live circuit. When I met up with her later, I tried to broach the subject lightly, but she dismissed my concern, her laughter ringing too loud, too haunting. The following months became a looping nightmare, where I'd catch Lynn watching me with an intensity that made my heart race, each encounter steeped in an unsettling tension I couldn't comprehend. I'd hear whispers behind my back, hushed tones between Jake and Lynn whenever I left the room, and Jake had begun to change too, his jovial demeanor shadowed by an underlying paranoia that echoed my own. Our intimate conversations grew strained, and he started to echo my own worries back at me. Was Lynn really just a friend, or had I become a pawn in their twisted game? The realization that Lynn had crossed a boundary I didn't fully grasp gripped me like a vice, and unease morphed into outright dread as I pieced together that her ramblings about roleplay might not have been innocent at all. One fateful night, driven by a mix of fear and determination, I decided I had to confront Lynn. I needed to know what was going on behind her mask of friendship. I invited her over, pretending to keep the atmosphere light, yet when she arrived, I could feel the storm brewing beneath our pleasantries, her laughter shrill and forced as I coiled my fists against my trembling legs. "What did you really mean when you said we were role-playing?" I pressed, and her expression flipped from playful to predatory, the corners of her mouth curling into that tight-lipped smile I'd come to dread. "Oh honey," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "you're the one playing a part, but the script was never given to you. You're just too naive to see it." My heart raced as I felt the air grow thick with something so palpable, it bordered on tangible. Every warning bell I had ignored screamed in my head, and I tried to excuse myself, to reclaim my sanity, but as I turned to the door, I could hear her murmuring my name, each syllable laced with something darker. The following week twisted into a surreal nightmare. I started to see shadows cast from my past interactions with both women seep through the cracks of my whitewashed reality, memories warped and rewritten. I catch Jake staring blanks at his phone, brow furrowed, whispers weaving like spider silk between Lynn's oddly timed texts and his own responses, and the intimacy we had shared dwindled to cold, vacant exchanges. I tried talking to him about how Lynn was siphoning energy between us like we were puppets strung along by her whims, but each time, he'd grow defensive, lashing out as if my concerns were unfounded, and I found myself backed into a corner, racked with doubt, as if I was losing both my boyfriend and my own sense of reality. On a particularly agonizing night, exhaustion overtook me, and I collapsed into a restless sleep, plagued by eerie dreams where I was an actor trapped in a puppet show, a caged bird pecked at by invisible threads pulling me into darker depths. I awoke with a start, and for a fleeting moment, the haze of the dream lingered, and I felt compelled to check my messages. The screen glowed eerie in the dark, and as I scrolled through the texts, dread coiled like a serpent around my heart when I discovered an unexpected text from Jake, "Meet me at the old playground," and the timestamp sent a shiver down my spine. It was sent during the night while I'd been dreaming. My heart pounded in my chest as questions overwhelmed me. Had they been plotting against me? What role had I been cast in? I grabbed my keys, driven by an impulse that propelled me forward, the shadows closing in like a muffled silence. The playground loomed in the distance, cloaked in darkness, and each step felt heavy, weighed down by foreboding whispers. As I arrived, the air turned thick and clammy, veiled in a chilling mist that whispered my name. "Jake." I called, but the night swallowed my voice whole. I turned, searching every silhouette under the moonlight, and then I saw her, Lynn, standing there, and in a heartbeat, I froze, terror gripping my throat as I felt an icy blast of realization. It wasn't Jake waiting for me, it was her, and the glint in her eyes confirmed the role I had unknowingly stepped into was far from innocent. "You finally made it," she said, her voice a twisted serenade that shattered my resolve. "I've been waiting for you." The darkness enveloped me, and I was left suspended in a nightmarish tableau, understanding too late that the laughter I once shared had been merely the haunting echo of a sinister game I never wished to play. I never imagined I'd be embroiled in a battle of morality with my sister, especially not after a long day that started with the usual chaos of life with my own kids. But my phone rang in the middle of a meeting, and it was like my heart stopped when I saw her name. "Sarah never calls unless it's an emergency. You need to come to the school now," she snapped, and it felt like ice water poured into my veins. "What's happening?" I asked, dread crawling under my skin like a swarm of ants. "It's Liam. He's waiting for me, and I forgot to pick him up." In that moment, the world around me blurred, my mind replayed the image of my sweet, innocent nephew, all big brown eyes, and that shy smile, waiting all alone in a cold, unwelcoming cafeteria long after the bell had rung. I felt a surge of rage and disbelief. How could she leave him there? "You put your phone on Do Not Disturb? Are you kidding me?" I yelled, my voice rising in disbelief. She dismissed my concern with a wave of her hand, as if this was just a minor inconvenience. "It's just a kid. He'll be fine until I get there," she responded too casually, shrugging her shoulder as if it was no big deal that her first grader was more vulnerable than a single light bulb flickering in a pitch-black room. I was enraged, imagining that little boy, staring at those doors, waiting for the only adult who he thought would pick him up, and instead, feeling the creeping realization that he'd been forgotten. My voice echoed through the phone, louder and sharper than I intended. "You need to stop acting like this is acceptable behavior. What kind of person just leaves their child behind? What are you thinking?" And as soon as I said it, I felt a chill run down my spine as if something sinister was watching from the shadows. I drove to the school, every nerve ending in my body aflame with anxiety, imagining all the worst-case scenarios, the cruelty of older kids, the indifference of teachers, and the emptiness of that cafeteria. When I arrived, I burst through the doors. My sister was already there, but it wasn't her face I was looking for, it was my nephew. My heart raced as I scanned the space, and then I spotted him at a corner table, head resting on crossed arms, a pathetic, lonely figure surrounded by the echoes of laughter from children who had long since reunited with their parents. "Liam." I called out, my breath hitching as he looked up, his tear-stained cheeks sending a dagger through my heart. He sprinted to me, wrapping his little arms around my waist as if I were the last lifeline in a drowning sea, and I couldn't hold back my own tears. "Why didn't Mommy come?" he whispered, his voice thick with confusion. I couldn't answer, as rage bubbled up anew along with maternal instinct. I turned to Sarah, my voice low but fierce. "How could you do this to him?" But the confrontation was interrupted by the school principal, a stern gaze beneath her thick glasses. "I really need to speak with you both," she said, and her tone suggested this was more than just a simple late pickup. We were ushered to her office where she would reveal a deep concern for Liam's well-being, her voice grave. "We've had reports of disturbing incidents in the area lately," she said, and my blood turned to ice. "Children have gone missing after school hours." My heart dropped as the implications sank in, visions of what could have happened to Liam racing through my mind like a runaway train. I looked at Sarah, her face pale as she glanced at Liam, who now stood wide-eyed, oblivious to the danger that could have befallen him. "I didn't know," she finally gasped, the reality of her negligence crashing down with the weight of 1,000 boulders. Everything changed in that moment. I could see her fear reflected in Liam's face, and it was then that I understood. She wasn't just careless, she was lost in a world of her own, one that wouldn't allow her to hear the tiny voice of her son, or the muffled cries for help of countless others trapped in their phones or their own minds. The principal continued, "Children need their parents more than ever, especially during these times." As she explained more about the cases in the area, I felt the air grow thick around us, suffocating. I had imagined a confrontation filled with shouting and blame, but instead, we were faced with the reality that we weren't just failing ourselves but the very ones we sought to protect. My anger morphed into deep sadness, the kind that grips you and doesn't let go, leaving room only for fear. My accusations hung in the air heavy, yet silent, while all I could hear was Liam's soft breaths and the distant voices of children still laughing outside, oblivious to the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. What haunted me then was the realization that perhaps, long before this incident, Sarah didn't just need me to yell. She needed me there, to guide her and Liam from whatever darkness she had fallen into, and that made me angrier than the reckless act itself. The principal's voice faded into a blur, warnings turning into echoes, while I held Liam close, swaying gently in a world now filled with shadows, not knowing if we'd ever truly be free of the hidden fears that lurk behind our screens, threatening to dissolve the fabric of our most sacred connections. How much longer could it go on like this?